thanks everybody for watching this interview tonight with great Tim Hagans. I'm very excited to have him on. And before we get going, I want to thank my sponsors, Euclid IQ, which is the world's leader in audio and video compression, and also Dylan Music. If you go to dylanmusic.com and give them the code Doolin5, you will see you'll get a 5% discount from Dylan Music. Also, I'd like to make everybody aware there is a new book out for developing younger players, the Vincent Chikowicz Fundamental Studies for the Developing Player. You can get it through Hal Leonard. And also, you should check out 2 CDs that Tim sent me this week with the NDR Big Band, A Conversation, was an excellent big band album, and also Faces Under the Influence, also with the NDR Big Band, Tim Hagans. So Tim, pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Mark. It's my pleasure. You know, trumpet players are my favorite people. So anytime I have a chance to talk with trumpet players, it's my pleasure.
Well, absolutely.
Only we know the arduous endeavor of spending a lifetime playing the trumpet. So I'm sorry?
Kind of a joyful pain sometimes.
Right.
And I've always enjoyed your playing, and there's so much to get into because you've played with everybody and so many people in so many different ways. And I thought we'd start by just talking about your beginnings in Dayton and growing up there and kind of how you got started on the trumpet.
Sure. My pleasure. Well, you know, as I said on our phone conversation yesterday, you asked me a question and it's an hour-long answer, but
it makes you a great
I started playing when I was 9 years old, and I think you know, at that time, I was born in 1954, so this is 1963, and at that time, you know, one heard a lot of live music in restaurants that I went to with my parents. On television, Herb Alpert had just hit, and you know, those records were all over the place. My parents bought every one, and I heard the trumpet there. Al Hirt, who, you know, went to CCM, the College Conservatory of Music in Cincinnati, and of course Doc Severinsen, that I would you know, offer to wash the cars and the dishes if I could stay up on weeknights to at least hear the opening credits, you know. So, and of course I heard all of the other instruments as well, but the trumpet just seemed to me to be the most vibrant, emotional sound. And my parents gave me a record. I think you can still find it. I researched it a few years ago, and it was the instruments of the orchestra for kids. And every instrument had a name, and the trumpet was called Crumpet the Trumpet. And when that track came on, it was like each track was demonstrating, you know, how the instrument sounded, and they had like a character as well. And so I always thought that was a pretty hip name. So
that how the Doc Severinsen record with that track on it came about, probably?
Maybe, yeah. This is an old record from maybe the late 50s, early 60s. And like I said, every instrument had a you know, a rhyming name, or you know, some kind of like name the kids could associate with and remember the instruments. So yeah, so there were a lot of influences, and I heard a lot of music live and on TV, my parents' record collection, but it was always the trumpet that really attracted me, you know. My first trumpet teacher, his name was Kermit Simmons, and he played with the Isham Jones Band in the late 30s. Woody Herman was a saxophone player in the Isham Jones Band, and I forget exactly why Isham got out of the music business, but he sold the book to Woody. And then it became the Woody Herman Orchestra. And there's some pictures of like Woody's band in 38, 39 with my trumpet teacher in the trumpet section. Wow. And some recordings. So, and he looked like Harry James. So I would go into this little studio, and he had pictures on the wall of him playing with Benny Goodman and Woody Herman and, you know, jazz heroes from the swing era. And I'm sitting there, and there's a picture of Harry James on the wall, and I'm sitting next to this guy that looked like Harry James and played like him too. So it was it was very impressive, you know.
What was he working on in lessons with you then?
Well, I studied with him for, you know, this was the fourth grade until I got into high school. So I guess it was 5 years of private lessons. And it was basically the Rubank books and, you know, some etudes. I'd bring in music that I was playing in the school band. And he also would write down songs for me. He wanted to know if there were any popular songs because he wanted to teach me like the hand vibrato and how to play a melody. So I remember Hello Dolly was one of the songs I liked. So I still have this little, you know, those little manuscript booklets that you tear out the pages with his handwriting of the melody to Hello Dolly. And I think there was a song from My Fair Lady. And, you know, there were some tunes that Tijuana Taxi that he wrote out for me. And he was concerned with playing musical, even if it was the C major scale. It was how to make it sound like a, you know, like a song.
Yeah.
And I had two other trumpet teachers, one in high school, and then I studied with Edwin Betts at Bowling Green State University, Ted Betts, and he had been at Eastman. He was the teacher of Lou Soloff and Chuck Mangione, and then he moved to Bowling Green. He was head of the brass department and a great classical player. But the three of these teachers, it's interesting, none of them really talked to me about the mechanics of playing the trumpet. And I think I had some kind of natural ability just to put the horn up and get a sound out of it and play. And that was probably a little deceiving to them because there are some fundamentals. You know, every once in a while I go back and try to start at the beginning and figure out what is the proper way to form an embouchure. And I went through some chop problems after playing with Stan Kenton and you know, some other times when I just felt like I was losing the high register a little bit or getting more fatigued. And so I go back and look at beginning videos for how do you form an embouchure? Where do you arch the tongue? I mean, just basic stuff that no one ever really told me. And it wasn't until I studied with, you know, sporadically with Bobby Shue that things really came together about the mechanics of playing the trumpet. And also Leif Bengtsson in Malmo, a great classical player, when I was living over there, he helped me out too. But it was really Bobby that talked about the corners, tonguing, a pivot, the wedge breathing. And it codified all these little bits and pieces I was gathering on my own into like a more effective way to play. And of course, most of what I do is improvising. And I'm not necessarily, I don't know what the word would be, but I'm kind of a very active player.
Yeah.
And I'm inspired more by saxophone players than trumpet players in the last 20 or 30 years. And so I'm trying to play all over the horn. It's very, you know, athletic in a way to enable the art. And I play in a lot of small groups, quartets and quintets, and I play long solos. So what I do is a little different than trumpet players playing other types of music, or even jazz trumpet players that play a little softer and maybe don't try to play 8 or 10 minute solos with a bashing drummer. But so it's always been a little. I'm always trying to become more effective and in the glorious attempt to play what I'm hearing in the moment. But so, like I said, it's a long answer to your question. But you know, my first trumpet teacher was, and all three of them that I had when I was going to school were great because they talked about music and how to make an etude sound musical, not just you know, playing it perfect or as perfectly as possible.
And you had a lot of exposure early on, as we talked earlier, and you told me that when you were in high school, that who was taking you to hear the Cincinnati Symphony several times a year?
Well, it was a mentor. His name was George Zimmerman, and he was superintendent of music for the Dayton Public Schools. There were 10, I think 10 uh, schools, school systems inside of that system from grade school through high school. And I saw him first when I was in third grade in the music class. He would come in and play the piano, and he was a very lively guy. He had a handlebar mustache, and he wore a bow tie, and he just come booming into the room and sit down at the piano. And he even got the third grade boys to sing. It was that much fun with him. And he kind of had his eye on me. In high school, he noticed that, several people throughout the school system were probably going to pursue music in college. And he started taking some of us to concerts, and the Dayton Philharmonic, where I grew up, but also the Cincinnati Symphony and the opera and plays. I remember we went to a Shakespeare play. It had no music, but it was like a modern version of and I forget what the play was, but he just wanted the arts interested high school students to be exposed to things that he could enable. And I remember after, the Dayton Philharmonic is a wonderful philharmonic orchestra. It's a small city. There's only 120,000 people there. And but he brought in, I remember Yehudi Menuhin to be a soloist with the orchestra because he was on the orchestra board. And I remember meeting him after the concert, and he was very gracious and humble. And George introduced me to him and says a trumpet player. And he just said, if you're ever in London and you want to come to my school, please come and knock on the door and I'd be happy. It was like for a 15, 16-year-old kid to have somebody like him say that. I mean, I was exposed to, a lot of great people and possibilities, and that's where I saw at a Pops concert in Cincinnati with Johnny Mathis. I saw Marie Speziali stand up in the trumpet section and play a great solo. And I thought, wow, this is incredible, So
can you talk? And we were talking too, like the scene in Dayton. You guys had quite an active music scene too, right? There were jazz clubs there. There were people that would come through. It seems a little unusual in 2021 to imagine. Can you talk about what those things were like and who would come through?
Well, first of all of the big bands were traveling year round. And so, grade school and high school, I saw Buddy Rich, Woody Herman, Stan Kenton, Ellington, Basie, several times. And then when Maynard Ferguson came back in 1970, 71, his band was traveling all the time. Also, there was a jazz club in Dayton in a little shotgun room. It was like maybe 50 or 60 people, owned by a guy named Jerry Gelati. And the club was called Jilly's. And it took on several different transformations. But when I was in high school, it was this little room right outside of Dayton, 50, 60 people. And the bands that came through played there for a week. They played Tuesday through Sunday with a matinee on Sunday afternoon. And that's where I heard, Freddie Hubbard, Cannonball Adderley, Pharoah Sanders, Chuck Mangione, Milt Jackson, Ahmad Jamal. All these people were in Dayton for a week. And they were traveling from east to west. They played Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Dayton, Indianapolis, Chicago, St. Louis. It was just like they were on tour for 10 or 15 weeks, and every town they played for a week. So in little Dayton, there was all this music going on, plus a pretty vibrant music education in the schools, grade school and high school. So I was very lucky.
That seems inconceivable to imagine today, that high school, even in a major city, that you could see that much stuff coming through. It's
right. Yeah. And I was very lucky. My parents they weren't musicians, but they were music fans. And they, when they were dating in the early 50s, they went to Stan Kenton concerts, Dave Brubeck concerts. And they played music at home. and they were always very supportive. So I was very lucky, and I'm an only child, so there was no. And my grandmother lived with us. These are little personal family stories, and she warned my parents not to spoil the kid. So I spent a lot of time just with my own imagination in my room, practicing, playing music. There wasn't a lot of interference from other siblings, and so I'm sorry.
Cell phones either.
Right, right. So
Yeah.
there was a lot of time to imagine what what life could be. You know.
And then and then when you were in high school, also you went to one of the Stan Kenton summer camps, right?
That was actually between my 2 years of college. I went to Bowling Green State University for 2 years, and went to a Kenton clinic in Springfield, Missouri at Drury College in I guess it was late June of 1973. And, I had no, I mean, I had aspirations, but it was the last thing I was going to think about, that they would call me at some point to play in the band. I was there just to hear Stan's band play every night, and I'd never been to like a jazz camp before, and a music camp, and I thought, oh, this would be great. And the one thing I did notice though was all the big bands came through, and if I saw Buddy Rich's band 3 times in a year, there was at least one, if not two, new trumpet players every time. And so I think back in my mind there was this idea that the guys turned over. And of course, at that time, the bands were playing every night. I mean, with Stan, we played 330 concerts a year and had a couple of weeks off at Christmas. So it took a certain kind of person with basically kind of a free person without a house payment and a family to do this. So there was quite a bit of turnover, but I never really expected that I would be called, but I was.
So how did that happen that you got into Stan Kenton's band?
Well, I met the trumpet players that were on the band in the summer of '73, and probably during that school year, I saw the band 2 or 3 other times, and I always went up and said hello, and they were very friendly. There was another trumpet player from the Dayton area. His name is John Harner, who was probably the perfect lead trumpet player for Stan Kenton. If you take every lead trumpet player that played in that band, John was the perfect cat for that band. And he was a student at the clinic, and he was kind of like the prince in waiting, like the next position available that they were going to call him. And then when I saw the band a few months later, he was on the band. But I don't remember talking to him or any of the other trumpet players about playing with the band. And it's kind of a funny story about how life works. But I went 2 years to Bowling Green, and then decided they didn't have a jazz department, but there were a lot of great musicians teaching there. Lou Marini, his father, Lou Marini Sr., was teaching there. A great clarinet saxophonist named Dave Mell was teaching there. It was the teachers were, teaching classical, kind of lessons, but they were jazzers, and they started the big band for no credit. And it's a great tenor player who plays with Maria Schneider's band, Rich Perry. He was there, many other guys, but it wasn't a formal jazz program. So I was going to transfer to Berkeley to start in the fall of 1974. And so I was home, but I had a gig, and I wasn't, we were playing little door gigs with some of the, my fellow students. But one gig that I did have was playing the Miss Ohio pageant. And it was like 2 days of rehearsals in Sandusky, Ohio, a little bit east of Toledo. And I'd done it the year before, and they asked me to do it again. And it was a fun gig, and I was home a couple of weeks before this, checked out of the dorm, getting ready to go to Berkeley. And I was going to another Stan Kenton clinic that summer. And John Harner, the lead trumpet player I mentioned, called me and asked me if I could come out and sub on the band. One of the trumpet players needed some time off and he wanted to know if I could come out for 2 weeks. And I was like, just thrilled and totally unexpected. And sometimes the wonderful things in life are just happen unexpectedly. You know, I've had several phone calls out of the blue that changed life completely. And this was one of them for about 10 seconds. And then he told me the dates, and it turned out it was the same. He wanted me to come out when I was supposed to do the Miss Ohio pageant.
Right.
Now, I'm a fairly honest guy, and I had never had a gig and had to cancel. I didn't know you could do that. If you promised to do the Miss Ohio pageant, you had to do it. So my parents are hearing this conversation and I'm excited for about 10 seconds. And then he tells me the dates and I go, oh, I'm sorry. I'm playing the Miss Ohio. I can't, you know. And John told me, he said, well, we'll keep you in mind for the future. And we hung up and my parents are standing there going, what was that? So I told them and they said, you're an idiot. No, they didn't really say that, but that was, you know. They said, you can't turn this down. So I called the guy that was the contractor for the Miss Ohio pageant. And he said, you're an idiot too. You know, you got to do this gig. I can find somebody else. So I tracked John down. At first, the Kenton office in LA didn't believe that I knew John. And it took a little while for them to give me the telephone number to where they were. And I called John back and said, I can do the gig. I got out of the Miss Ohio pageant, you know. And he said, well, I talked to the trumpet player and he can leave a week early, a week later. So you can do the Miss Ohio pageant and then join the band. So I called the contractor back. And so I ended up playing the Miss Ohio pageant for a week, ending on Saturday night. And then started with Stan for what I thought was going to be 2 weeks the following day. You know, so that's how I got, you know, called in the band. And it was because, you know, how things work. It was a trumpet player in Ohio named Tom Wade, who was a lead trumpet player, played in a lot of big bands. And he had heard me play at a rehearsal band in Dayton and just mentioned something to John along the way at some point. And that's how I kind of got into John's, you know, world, and he ended up calling me. And the trumpet player who went home decided he'd rather stay at home, and through a series of events, I just stayed on the band for almost 3 years.
Wow. Can you talk about that experience? Because that must have been like, you know, a different kind of music education altogether.
Yeah, well, excuse me. It's a little dry. I'm going to have this is water, by the way.
Of course.
Well, you know, like I said, I heard all of the big bands growing up. And when I heard Stan, I think I heard Stan's band after I'd heard all the other bands. And it was the one that really knocked me out because of the sound, the percussion, you know, the dynamics of the band. It was just incredible. And they were playing a lot of Latin music. The first jazz band I heard that was not like a big band was Mongo Santa Maria's band, with the great trumpet player Ray Maldonado, and Hubert Laws was in the band, Bernard Purdy, Sonny Fortune. And that was when I was in high school. And I used to play along before like Aebersold play along records with Mongo Santa Maria records. And so when I heard Stan's band, they were playing a lot of Latin music. And so that really hit me. They were playing more Latin music than the other bands, and odd time signatures. And so that kind of became my favorite band. And so when I was sitting there that first night at a roller rink in Zanesville, Ohio, we were playing like a dance concert thing. I thought, you know, what happened? Last night I was in the pit at the Miss Ohio pageant playing third trumpet, and, you know. But I wasn't hired to play solos at that point, although I gravitated to that chair when the guy who was playing the solos left. And in college, I was a lead player, and I could just muscle my way through playing lead on all those charts. We played a bunch of Maynard charts. If you can imagine me, you know, if you're familiar with my playing, that I played like Give It One and those kind of things, and screaming out high A flats and A's. It's I have some recording. I'll send you them. But so, and I could read very well, and we played a lot of Kenton charts at Bowling Green. So it was, it felt, I wasn't all that nervous, but it was just an incredible feeling. Harmonically, we talk about improvisation. I was basically playing by ear, and had figured out a lot of things, and of course knew chords and, you know, chord scales, and was trying to coalesce all of this information that I'd gathered from different sources. And there weren't a lot of books back then, you know, compared to now. So it was kind of like teaching yourself in a way. And I'd pretty much done that for everything else in life. For some reason, being an only child and having to figure things out by myself, not having like an older brother or sister to like point the way. So I was just kind of groping through harmony, and I had a pretty good ear. But there were a lot of holes, really a lot of holes. And I remember one guy on the Kenton band, an alto player, great alto player in Florida, in Miami. I think Dan Bonsanti is his name. And he came up to me one night after the gig and said, on the 8th bar of the blues, it's the 5 of 2, and you have to play the 3rd. It's an E7 going to an A minor, which is the 2 into the 5 into G, you know, and you got to play the G sharp. And I said, you're kidding. We're playing a blues in G and I have to play a G sharp. It's seemed incredible to me, you know.
Yeah.
But he said, you're going for that note. You're looking for that note. I can hear you play, searching for that note by the energy and the way you're, you know, forming your lines, but you never play that note. And I said, yeah, I'd never think you could play, you know, a G sharp in the key of G. And the next night I went out and played that note, and it was like the whole world opened. So that's the way I found out about notes and improvisation, was by sometimes people coming up and saying, I'm sick and tired of hearing you not play this note. Can you please play this,
right,
this note? But it was so important to me, the power of one note, that G sharp on the 5 of 2 in the key of G meant so much. It opened up so many doors and harmonic possibilities.
right,
That even though I was playing a G on that chord, instead of it sounding like the root of the tonality, all of a sudden, because I played the G sharp, the G sounded like a sharp 9. And that's a completely different sound than just playing a G in a tune that's in the key of G.
right.
So it emphasized to me the importance vertically and horizontally of every note that we play when we improvise. And it made me realize the importance, like a fermata of, like, let's say a G on a G triad. If you just play that as a fermata, a very basic sound, there is so much emotion and life in that sound. And the G on a G triad is unlike any other note in the chromatic scale, vertically. Right. And then when you play it as a fermata, you start hearing where that note could go, you know. And so the vertical and horizontal emotion, vibe, color of every note in the chromatic scale on every chord became like a lifelong study, you know. And that's why, you know, when I talk to students, I tell them there's only one chord scale. It's a chromatic scale. And every note works on every chord. But in order to have that freedom, you have to realize as a fermata, every note in the chromatic scale and how it sounds against every chord. And that's what playing with Stan Kenton started, you know, started me thinking along those lines. Yeah. Because we were also playing a lot of modal charts, minor chords or just vamping on a dominant chord in odd time signatures. And Stan, he never really said this, but you could tell he wanted you to go out and play different every night. He didn't want to hear the same stuff night after night. Right. And so there was kind of a little pressure to get the smile on his face when you finished your solo and I walked back around him back to the trumpet section, to come up with something different every night. And if you're playing on G minor for 5 minutes in 5/4, and the demand is that every night you play something different, well, the Dorian scale only goes so far. Yeah. You know? So I started experimenting with all of the other notes, and I would notice that the drummer, if I played a B natural on a G minor chord, the drummer would play more active because of the vertical tension of that note, and then the question of where does that note go to resolve? What's the next note?
Right.
And then I'd hear Stan play like clusters and percussive things, you know. And so the power of each note vertically and horizontally, just like I said, it became a lifelong study, and how I react to it when I play it and how the people around me react to those notes too. And even the listener, the last thing they're expecting is for the trumpet player to come out and play a B natural on a G minor chord and hold it out for 4 bars, you know. And if you do that, the note changes as it's being played. It changes in intensity, and all of a sudden it becomes an acceptable note, and you start hearing where it's going to resolve to. And so that's a huge thing that I learned from Stan is he gave me the opportunity to go out every night, 300 times a year, and play for 5 minutes on a G minor chord with a great rhythm section, and in front of an audience where you have to play on a professional level, and play something different every night. And it really has kind of, you know, guided my own development through more complicated things, but it's always been thinking about each individual note and what it means vertically and horizontally.
Now, did he talk to you about this ever? I mean, or did he talk to you much as just as a band member at all?
Not really. And Stan didn't like to talk about the old days.
Yeah.
And I was pretty shy. I've kind of gotten over that now, as you notice. But you know, I was 19 when I joined the band.
Yeah.
And and he was, you know, this huge cat with this big voice and a very powerful presence. So I was, you know, I talked to him, of course, and, you know, just small talk, but some of the new guys would get on the band and they'd come up and they'd say, Stan, you know, what was Vito Musso like? You know, a tenor player that played with Stan in the 40s. And Stan would just like turn his face, look out the window on the bus and say, Vito who? You know, now they were good friends, but he just didn't want to talk about it, you know. So I kind of kept my distance. And now I think back and I'm sorry that I didn't talk to him more and find questions that he would be interested in answering, you know.
Were there any funny anecdotes on that band? I mean, you were on there for 3 years. There must have been some crazy things that talk about.
Well, wow, I should have prepared and thought back, you know. I'm sure there's some that can't be shared for legal purposes, but
I would imagine those bus trips became like a classroom though too, right? You guys are sharing information and talking about music quite a bit.
Right. You know, and you know, this is I hate to sound like the old guy, but I was alive in the 70s and the cassette days, and this is something I think it's very important for people to talk about and to relay to the students today, because I sat on a bus for, you know, 11 and a half months, and in my own private collection were 60 LPs on 30 cassette tapes. And that's all I listened to for a year. And it might sound like a lot, 60 LPs, but if you think about sitting on the bus every day for sometimes 4 hours, sometimes 8 hours, you know, all night rides, if the gig the next day was too far to sleep over, you know, And I listened to those 60 records over and over and over. And I've never really transcribed anything like formally transcribed, sitting down and writing solos. But I think I audibly transcribed. I can sing along with Freddie Hubbard's solo on One Finger Snap or Maiden Voyage or Art Blakey records, and sing along with Miles and Clifford Brown from Birdland, or and I think it's really important because to realize that that's the way people used to listen to music. And as you mentioned, we were exchanging cassettes, and people would listen to mine and I'd listen to theirs, and we'd have a conversation. And also we all had the opportunity to go out every night and try to implement what we were listening to, you
right.
know. And you could always tell when, you know, like somebody was listening to something. I mean, the drummer that I played with the most when I was a soloist on the Kenton band was Gary Hobbs, who's an incredible drummer. And I've been listening recently to some of the tapes from that time. And he's like, it's just incredible the way he played. And I think that kind of formed my idea of how the drum should sound in small groups. And Stan always wanted a very powerful drummer. Yeah. But during the solos, you know, you could come down a little bit and, you know, and, but Gary was just, I mean, we had a conversation the whole time on the bandstand. I left a lot of space. I was listening to a lot of Miles, the Electric Miles stuff that had really just come out, you know, Bitches Brew, Live at the Fillmore, Black Beauty, On the Corner. And, you know, the way Miles played on those records was phrases and then leaving space. Yeah. And Gary was listening to those records too. And so we had this conversation going, and it really, you know, you could tell the discussions of what we did during the day affected how we played at night. And that's really important. But just as a little parenthesis, those 60 records, although I've forgotten some of this now, I knew who all the musicians were. I knew who wrote the songs, when they wrote the songs. I knew which studio they were recorded in, who did the liner notes, what year, where. Now with streaming, what do you know? You know the leader and the name of the song. And, you know, students today could be listening to Tony Williams on 5 different records and not realize that they're listening to the same drummer on those 5 different records, and know nothing about this is early Tony, this is later Tony, you know. How did Tony play behind Miles as opposed to this record that was done a week after this Miles record with Tony with Freddie Hubbard? How did Tony sound with Kenny Dorham on Joe Henderson's Una Mas? You know, how did Kenny play with Tony Williams as opposed to Art Blakey? I mean, all of these things. This is what you get from, you know, it's the history. And I still have these notebooks. I had numbered cassettes, and I had one of those little label makers. Yeah. The notebooks were that information, because you can't get all that stuff on a cassette package. So I had notebooks that, you know, Freddie Hubbard, Ready for Freddie, Blue Note, the catalog number, the sidemen, the tunes, who, you know, it's very important, you know, that kind of stuff. So that's what we did during the day. We listened to music, and there were a lot of blackjack games too. The trumpet case that I had, a double trumpet case, was the right size to go over the aisle on 2 arms of the seats on opposite sides of the aisle. And it was big enough for 4 or 5 guys to put down their quarters and
play blackjack.
Like blackjack, you know. Now there was a story. This is before I got on the band, but I can relay this. And some people say it's not true, but Stan had an arrangement of Hey Jude, and everybody hated it, and probably Stan hated it too, but was just doing it because it was, you know, at that point, a new Beatles tune. And Stan flew one day, I guess they were in the Southwest, to do a radio interview. He wasn't on the bus. He was going to meet him that night. And so they stopped the bus and got the parts out of Hey Jude and buried them in the desert. And then that night when Stan called it, everybody was like looking through their book going, I don't know. We can't seem to find it. Where, you know, and then that was that was the end of Hey Jude. So there were things that did happen, you know, pranks and
Maybe Maynard dug it up.
yeah. I think his arrangement was a little hipper anyway. So
Yep. What about so what took you off of the Kenton band to go into the Woody Herman band? Talk about that transition a little bit.
well, I think after almost 3 years with Stan, and I'm always, you know, I'm thinking about development and the future, and I'd heard Woody Herman's band many times, and they were more of a bebop kind of swinging, perhaps harmonically more complex. They had arrangements of giant steps and you know, like I don't know, you know, the difference is pretty immense between the two bands, just in the repertoire, but also the way the bands played.
Right.
And I think I was gravitating more to like, because I was listening to small group records all the time. And Woody's band was like a big small group in a way, long solos on bebop, functional harmony, chord progressions. And so I expressed my interest to the trumpet player, Dennis Dotson, who's Houston based, but an incredibly lyrical, beautiful player. One of those guys I wish I could play like, but my quirky brain prohibits me from playing that way. But it's really, you know, admirable the way Dennis plays. And we played a double concert with Woody's band. And he said he was leaving, and I said, well, you know, I might be interested. And another phone call out of the blue, they called me on a Christmas break with Stan, and I had grown a little tired of the massive sound and some of the music we were playing every night, and it was just time for a change. Although I really loved playing with the band. And
Was that? And I'm sorry to interrupt before you go into Woody. Was that Stan Kenton era? Was it like Age of Aquarius stuff? Is that?
no, that's a little bit earlier. That's when he was still with Capitol Records, late '60s.
Okay, I should have looked before. I couldn't remember that. I was thinking it might have been not too far from that.
No, Capitol at the end, he did a bunch of concept records.
Yeah,
Know.
yeah. But go ahead.
Yeah. Including one with Tex Ritter, you know, that they both claimed the other one made them record, but they were both with Capitol. It's an interesting record, you know.
I'll look for that.
So yeah, I played, excuse me, I played with Woody's band for a month, and then I got fired for a couple of reasons. One was Woody didn't know that I'd played with Stan before, and it was the trumpet players that did the recommendations. So when Dennis Dotson left, they called me, but Woody wasn't aware. And I remember one night, first or second night on the band, he walked by me, I was warming up, and he looked down at my trumpet case, and there was a big Stan Kenton Creative World sticker on it. And he just kind of frowned at me, you know. And, but also Dennis was at that time, Dennis was on a much higher level, just fluidity and nailing the changes. And I had this thing, but it didn't fit into Woody's vision of, you know, even though I was making the changes the way I was playing on giant steps and the blues and really fast rhythm changes, but it sounded a little weird to Woody.
Yeah.
And so it's funny, we did like, some of the trumpet players later said they thought I was going to get fired after the first night. And after the first week, I was still there. They said, well, I guess you're here to stay. But actually, we were playing a lot of important gigs. I started with the band in Chicago, and we played a lot of big cities in the Midwest, New Orleans. We played at UCLA, the Great American Music Hall in San Francisco. And as soon as we got to Minot, it was in Bismarck, it was see you later, you know. And the funny thing was, the day I got fired, you know, with Stan, if you got fired from Stan's band, you had to play out your 2 weeks, which was, you know, a little strange for some guys.
Sure.
With Woody, you were gone the next day. And there was a day off from Bismarck to Chicago that the bus was making, but Woody was flying. And his road manager put me on the same flight sitting next to Woody from the flight from Bismarck to Chicago, you know. And I think Woody was more unhappy about that than I was.
It sounds like it could have been an uncomfortable flight.
Well, we had a nice conversation. He said, you know, he was just looking for something else. And he named off this huge list of people. And if I'm remembering correctly, Jim Pugh was mentioned in there too, the great trombone players, people that he had fired and then asked to come back. And he said, you know, I'm looking for somebody different now, and I'm sure we'll be calling you again, you know. And he was very nice, you know.
So after Woody, did you go directly to Sweden after this, or go home for a little bit and then go to Sweden?
Yeah, no, I went home to my parents' place in Dayton for about a month, and then I went to Sweden because we had just done with Stan, we had done a month-long tour in September of '77.
Yeah.
And I made some contacts in Sweden and Denmark. And my chops, I noticed this on Woody's band, that I was having some chop problems after playing with Stan for almost 3 years. It was a weird combination of playing loud notes in the middle register combined with playing solos all over the horn, also pretty loud. And I got into this finesse thing with Woody's band, and the time was different. I was playing fourth trumpet, I guess. There were 5 trumpets. I was playing fourth, and I was playing louder than anybody else just because I was coming from Kenton world.
Right.
And it also had like created an aperture that was like, you could drive a truck through my aperture playing like that, you know. And I wanted to go to New York, but I thought, you know, these people said, if you get off the road, we could probably find you some work. And I didn't feel comfortable going to New York, you know. So I had some connections in Malmo, Sweden, which is right across this, the Öresund Strait from Copenhagen. You know, on a clear day, you can see each city from the other city. It's that close. And I just went over to see what was going to happen, and I ended up staying 5 years. And it was a great experience and opened up the future because I've worked so much in Sweden during my career, you know.
Well, you had met so many people that were important to you there. I mean, Woody Shaw, Dexter Gordon, Thad Jones. Can you kind of talk about those guys? I mean, and maybe while we're on this subject, because I know that that Freddie and Miles were also so important to you, as well as Thad and Woody. Could you maybe talk about those 4 guys, but also your experiences in Sweden and kind of what all went into the laboratory at that point? I know that's a big question.
Well, I'll weave it all together, I promise.
Okay. That sounds good.
But yeah, you know, there were a lot of older statesman musicians that for many reasons, but including just the racial vibe here in the United States, and also in a larger aspect, the way artists are treated in Europe. It was attractive to elder statesmen in jazz, not that elder, but, you know, a generation or a generation and a half before me. And I'm talking about the people I played with that were living in Copenhagen at that time. Kenny Drew, who played piano with a lot of records for Blue Note as a leader, but also played with Coltrane on Blue Train. Ed Thigpen was there, Oscar Peterson's drummer. Sahib Shahab, great alto baritone player, played with Dizzy. Ernie Wilkins, arranger for Basie. Thad Jones. Dexter was there. And it was like, well, I want to play with, these are my heroes. I want to go to New York and play with them, but they were all over there. So, and for some strange reason, they welcomed me. I was like a hippied out 22-year-old wearing jeans and a tie-dye t-shirts and you know, But they heard something in the way I played and started calling me for gigs and recommending me for things. I was also subbing in the Danish radio big band. And they had just brought Thad Jones over to be the leader. And he led that band for 2.5 years. And I was never a full-time member, but two of the trumpet players, one was Idris Suleiman, who's, played with Charlie Parker, was a boyhood friend of Fats Navarro in Florida. He was playing in the Danish radio big band, and he used to call me all the time to sub. And so there was a lot of work. Plus, I was living in Sweden and playing with some great Swedish musicians. Red Mitchell, great bass player, was living in Stockholm. And it just seemed like, wow, this is all these cats that are part of the history. And they're including me, And it was the first time I'd played with like free music, because there were a lot of European musicians that were playing, not just standard tunes, but just like new compositions through composed, a lot of free stuff. And it was a great education. And, I was playing all the time. I went from playing on the road every day to, I wasn't playing gigs every day, but there were rehearsals. It was like a very vibrant scene. Yeah. Plus the thrill of living in a foreign country. I mean, I speak Swedish. I get off the plane in Stockholm and I feel like, oh yeah, I'm home in a way, And I think that everybody should spend some time, not just a 2-week tour through Europe, but should spend some time in another country, because it really opened my eyes to other ways that you can do the same thing.
Yeah.
Education, healthcare, support of the arts. We have systems here that are, most people think are the only and the best way to do things. And from my time living in other countries, I know that that perhaps is not true. Definitely, there are other ways to do things. There's always, things that systems could do better. But it really opened my eyes to the wider world at a very young age. It was very informative.
Well, I was going to ask you about that a little later. So we'll hit pause, and I'd like to talk about that now. We can talk about Woody and everything else a little bit later.
Okay.
What was your feeling about that? Because you already mentioned that there was a state-supported big band that never happened. That alone should not stop people in their tracks. I mean, can you talk about what were the arts supported like in the schools, in the public? I mean, Norrbotten, where you were a little bit later. I mean, that's it's not as big as Stockholm or something. I mean, like
right.
Talk about those kind of things and sort of where their values are in terms of education and why that's important.
Well, I think just in general, when I talk about Europe, I'm talking about the Nordic countries that I know very well. Perhaps not Norway so much, but definitely Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. And also I've worked a lot in Germany, and those are the 4 countries that I'm most familiar with. And there's a lot of similarities, and there is kind of a national vibe that in order to be competitive, I mean, they do think about being competitive in the world. And you look at companies in Sweden, Ericsson, Volvo, Saab, they have also IKEA, furnishing the world. I mean, these companies are from a country that has 10 million people. There's more people living in New York City than live in Sweden. But those 10 million people accomplish this because they know they have to compete in the rest of the world. And so they realize in order to do that, people have to be educated and they have to be healthy. And part of both of those things is exposure to the arts. And they have to reduce the stress in a way so that people can be effective in whatever they do, in their personal lives, whatever they're working with, And, you know, there's a lot of myths about those countries propagated here that we don't need to go into all that. But,
Healthcare.
you know, but for example, if you are in a job and you think you'd like to have another job in Sweden, for example, or you need more education to get a better job or something you feel you're more qualified to do, losing your healthcare is never in that formula, you know. And if you are going to go to college, the tuition is incredibly affordable, if not free. And the tax rate that they pay is about the same as we pay here, unless you're making a lot of money, 28, 30% for all those things. And that includes exposure to the arts. Almost everything that I do in Europe in some form or another is supported by some kind of government support for the arts, because they, you know, think it's so important. And also, if you look at all the art forms that we run into here in this country, I'm, you know, talking about the painters, the authors, the people who wrote classical music, it all comes from Europe. So there is this incredible history,
yeah,
you know. And the other thing that I always like to point out, and this is my own theory, I don't, you know, have a lot of facts for this. I'm not like a fact wonk on these things, but those things that I just mentioned were supported by either the church or by monarchies. And they served a function in those two systems. And when the democratic governments came to be in the late 1800s and into the 20th century, they transferred either through just peaceful transition or incredible wars from monarchies to some form of democracy. They carried the support of the arts into it. And the democratic government said, we have to continue this. There's no longer a king that's going to order court music and art for the castle, you know, but we have to keep this going. Well, in this country, we never had that first system. It was always some form of democracy. So there never was like an art world that was supported in this country that had to transfer over to the government. It was always only the government. And so there is no tradition,
right?
You know, so there's the National Endowment for the Arts. There's lots of organizations you can apply to, and there is money in this country for the arts, but there's so many people that are competing for it. It's on a completely different level, the support in Europe. And I think that's what, you know, makes people smarter. It makes them happier. You know, and if I can continue on this subject, sorry, we'll get to Woody Shaw, I promise.
We can talk about Woody Shaw anytime.
In Wild Eighth Notes. But I did 6 records for Blue Note in the 90s. And the last 2 were kind of whacked out electronica with my partner in harmonic melodic crimes, Bob Belden, for many years. And one of those records, the first one was called Animation Imagination. The second one was called Reanimation, which was a live record. Both nominated for Grammys and both not really supported by the record company because of various reasons. But I was doing a clinic in Reno, Nevada. This is in 2001, the September of 2001, I think. And along with Ingrid Jensen and Brian Lynch, I was an adjudicator for the Carmine Caruso trumpet competition with the International Trumpet Guild. And my master class was at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. And a guy, there were about 50 people in the room, and a guy raised his hand right off the bat before we started. And he said, you know, I got up early this morning. I live 2 hours away. I came to ask you this question. I'm not a musician, but I bought this record, Reanimation, the live one, and I listened to it probably 10 or 12 times. And I have no idea what it's about. I have no idea if I like it. You know, but I'm compelled to listen to it, to try to figure out what's going on. And so I saw that you were going to be here, and I thought I'd come and ask you if you could help me figure out what this record's about. And really the only thing I could say was, that's the greatest compliment. that's the function of art. It's, you know, of course it's great when people immediately like something, but this person was compelled to continue listening. And by doing that, they were examining their own feelings and their own emotions. And he said there were things on there that really disturbed him. Now, you know, we're just playing music, but it was like uncomfortable for him. And he said there's things on there that I think, wow, that's incredible. And it said it goes back and forth. And so I'm confused by it. And I thought, well, that's the function of art, you know, is to keep somebody thinking about themselves and giving them something to react to that they're not completely comfortable with. That's the function of pop music. It's popular. You know, you hear a song 2 or 3 times, you can sing along with it. You know immediately if you like it or don't like it. And that's not anything disparaging with pop music, because I grew up listening to, you know, James Taylor and Motown and Blood, Sweat and Tears, and, you know, but that's the function of art. It's to keep people thinking about themselves and how they react to what they're listening to, what they're seeing, what they're reading, you know. And so he never really got an answer that helped him. I just asked him to continue listening, you know.
When are you speaking on a committee in front of Congress about this?
Anytime.
You be a strong advocate. That's a great answer for anybody that really needs an answer. That's a copy of whatever he just said.
Yeah, because you can carry it over to what you're going to have for dinner. Are you going to buy organic or GMO? What kind of car are you going to buy? Who are you going to vote for? All these decisions in life can be that complex. And that way you know that you're making the right decision for you. It may not be the right decision for the person next to you, but this is, you know more if you can follow this process through listening to the Tarangalila Symphony.
Yeah.
Olivier Messiaen, and then use whatever you learn from that on what you're going to have for dinner. Well, there you go. Then we have a smart population. That's what I mean by art makes you smart. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of smart, talk about Thad Jones.
Oh, Thad Jones, one of my favorite subjects.
I hope that was a smooth segue back to.
Yeah, and I'm going to leave you for just a second to help enhance this next discussion.
Okay.
This is I hope it shows up. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a picture I took of Thad Jones in probably May of '82. And there's very few pictures of him at the piano. But I thought it was a great shot, and I had a good, you know, film camera at that time. So
very cool picture.
That's Thad. We were doing a gig in Italy with kind of an all-star big band. And he was rehearsing. I don't know if you can see, there's a singer, Andy Bay, and his hands are in the background, but they were rehearsing. So anyway, I have this picture on my stereo system, you know.
It's amazing. What was it like the first time you met him? Because I know he was such a hero to you.
Yeah, and you know, we were talking about big bands earlier, and I mentioned how much Stan's band meant to me. And I remember sitting on the bus listening to some of Thad and Mel's records, and I didn't understand anything. It was like, you know, it just was above what I could comprehend. But of course, like the guy in Reno, I just listened over and over. And then we had many nights, days in New York where we play at a high school in New Jersey or Long Island or somewhere, and we'd be back in the city by 10:30. And Monday night, and third set started at 1, you know, it was like 3 sets, 9, 11, and 1. So I saw Thad many times before I actually met him, sitting there in the vanguard, him conducting the band. And it was just, you know, there was so much joy and the love of life in him and the music.
Right.
He was Louis Armstrong was his big hero. you know. And I remember walking out of a club in Copenhagen after a rehearsal, and there was a jazz calendar. And for that month, it was a picture of Louis Armstrong. And Thad just went like this. He went and put it right on Pop's lips, you know. In the middle of our conversation, he just stopped and had to do that, you know. So, and I hear that in the way Thad plays. I mean, he plays completely different, but the timing, especially when he's playing quarter notes on the beat, the way Pop's played those notes is incredible. And, you know, everything he wrote, and this is what surprises me, the horizontal lines that he wrote, whether it's a lead trumpet part on a shout chorus, or it's the soprano sax lead line on a sax soli, the melodies to tunes, the horizontal aspects of his music came directly from his trumpet cornet playing. You can hear it, it's the same language, you know. But harmonically, he was like an Ellington Strayhorn scholar. And he used to sit at the piano and just, you know, I remember one time he said, here's how Strayhorn would voice a major 7 chord for the band. Oh,
hey, speaking of, I'm sorry, hold that thought, because somebody wants to say hi to you real quick.
Okay. Oh. Marie.
Hey, Tim. How you doing, bud?
I'm good. How are you? Wow.
Not too bad for an old lady.
Oh, are you kidding?
Marie, we talked about you a little bit earlier, and we were just now talking about Thad Jones and how his harmonic writing was like Ellington and Strayhorn. And I told Tim about the picture of you with Duke Ellington.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. Did you show it to him?
Yeah.
He's talking, I'll grab it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tim, it was just real fortuitous that there was the CSO's photographer happened to be in the audience for that concert and got that great shot, you know?
Wow.
Yeah, what a great experience that was. I mean, my feet didn't touch the ground for weeks after that.
I wonder if there are any recordings.
No, you know, so many of those the concerts way back then, they weren't archived. Right. No, I don't think they even exist. They've just we played the concert and poof, that was it, you know.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So how have you been? I'm so proud of you, man. You're just you're killing it.
Thank you. It means the world that you say that. You know,
I was trying to remember what year were you a freshman?
Well, you know, it's funny. I didn't go to CCM. I taught there for a year when the unfortunate thing with Frank Brown happened.
With Frank, I thought you were in school.
Yeah. No, but here's the thing. I had an audition in the probably the spring of '72 because I graduated in '72. And I had an audition with you, Eugene Blee, and Frank Brown.
Right.
And I came in, and I was not anywhere close to being any kind of like performance major that the program was looking for, because I cracked every other note that I played, and you know. And Frank years later said, you know, I remember your audition, and if we had had a jazz program at that point, it would have been a no-brainer. But I came in and played the first movement of the Haydn trumpet concerto, and you know, you all could tell I wasn't. But you know, but then when Frank was when he passed, I taught for a year before Pat Harbison came in, and that's when I would see you all the time. You know?
Right. Yeah, because if you came in '72, that makes me, I was beginning to think maybe I was getting Alzheimer's. That accounts for why I don't remember specifics, because it was in '72 or '73 that I started teaching up at Miami University, and I wasn't at the conservatory until I had to pretty much fill in for Frank with the CSO when they were doing the proto Carmen suite.
Right.
And Frank got sick at intermission, and so I had to go out front and sight read his part, you know. And
wow.
yeah, so it was after that that I was asked to, you know, return to the conservatory. Yeah.
Right. Well, you know, the first time I saw you play, and I forget the year, but I think it was a Pops concert with Johnny Mathis, and you stood up and played a solo from back in the section, and I thought, wow, that's incredible. You know, I mean, you know, because I'd been to orchestra concerts in Dayton and Cincinnati. I'd never seen anything like that.
Oh, wow.
And all of a sudden you just stood up and played. It was 8 or 16 bars. It was beautiful. I don't know when that would be. I was probably 10 or 11 years old, and I just started playing the trumpet. So you were one of my first.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. You know, there aren't, I guess, a lot of people that remember that I actually really did play trumpet.
Yeah, sure. And then I remember when I was with the Kenton band outside of Cincinnati, we were staying, I forget where it was, but there was a diner next to the hotel. After the concert, I went over to get something to eat, and you're sitting in a booth with Ramon Lopez.
Right. I was gonna say, I was thinking that may have been the last time that has it been that long since I've seen you, for real?
Well, I think that was before I taught at CCM, but that was one of the last times, you know.
Yes. Yeah. And sadly, I hear Ramon passed away. Did I hear that?
Yeah, several years ago.
Yeah. I go. Age has its privileges, so I get to, you know, spend some time in Florida, you know, during the winter, and so I'm talking to some of the folks down there that actually. A trumpet player who's now almost in his 90s, and he played in my dad's Cuban conjunto when he was in high school.
Wow.
So we talk about the old timers, and of course Ramon, you know, his name comes up, his sister's name, because his family had like a Cuban conjunto. It was a family affair, with a few added on, you know.
Right.
But but Ramon was a great conga player, man.
Yeah.
The guy had chops.
Yeah, the first jazz band I heard, not the big bands, but like a small group, was Mongo Santa Maria. And that's one of the reasons why when I heard Stan's band, I thought, oh, this is great, because this is, you know, the picture I had of small group jazz. So we hung out all the time. He played a lot of music for me on the bus, you know, tapes of like, you know, Cuban music, different kinds, Afro-Cuban and
that's it. That's what I grew up with, you know. That's literally what I thought. I thought John Philip Sousa was classical music. I grew up with all that, you know, the Cuban. So if he showed you the Cuban chart, it's about this big. It's not a standard size, and out of this they get 20 minutes of music, you know.
Right.
You had to follow the road signs. You do this, you do that, and then you go back to that, and you jump in.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I didn't mean to, you know.
No. It's a.
No, your timing was good, because that was a good segue into the Ellington part of Thad Jones's writing.
Wow.
Yeah, because Thad was really an Ellington scholar, you know, and he had really, you know, and we talked earlier about Stan Kenton, and I really didn't ask Stan a lot about composition or about music in general. It was the age difference, and I was a little shy, and I think now I have a bunch of questions I'd like to ask him. And it's the same with Thad Jones, because he learned that somewhere. He learned all of that music and then put his own spin on it.
Put his own,
You know, but it's definitely, the harmonic thing is definitely coming out of
the Ellington school, right?
And he told me that he was playing with the Basie band for about 6 years, but they would have periods where they were off the road, and he was called to play with Ellington because they needed a trumpet player, and he knew everybody, and they knew that he'd like to play with the band at some point. And he sat down on the first night at his, you know, the music stand, and there was no charts at all. So he asked like Cootie Williams or Mercer Ellington, he said, where's my book? And they said, oh, there is no book, you know, just play something, and if Duke looks up at you, that's the wrong note. And Thad said it took him about 3 or 4 nights, and then the whole concert, Duke didn't look at him once at all. So he knew he had the book down. You know?
Wow, wow. The experiences you have had, my dear. Wow. So you, how long were you with Kenton?
Almost 3 years, from 72 to 77. And wow. Then I lived in Sweden for 5 years after that. So I came back to Cincinnati and in 82 and started playing, you know, with the Blue Wiz Big Band,
right,
and other small group gigs around Cincinnati, and you know.
Did you ever play with Buddy Rich?
No, and I'll tell you, I guess this is going.
No wonder you're still alive.
I don't think I could have handled it, just stress-wise, of going on the bandstand, knowing that you had the possibility of getting yelled at every night. And I know it's unfounded and probably unfair, but I just, and I was never formally offered to do it, but there were some feelers put out, especially during that time in the 80s when I was in Cincinnati, and some of the guys were playing with Buddy that would come through and wanted to know if I'd maybe at some point. And I said, I don't think I could deal with that. You know,
those guys deserve combat pay.
Oh yeah, and I know a lot of guys that play with Buddy, and they're all very mellow, nice guys, and I'm thinking, you're such a calm person. How did you deal with that? I could never, you know.
Yeah, how did they? I mean, you know, seriously, like it just.
Yeah, but I loved listening to the band, and he was just an incredible.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Yeah, for sure.
And a nice guy. I actually hung out with him a few times at parties and backstage, because with Stan we'd do double concerts with the other bands, you know. And he was very nice, very, you know, just like, you know, but there were those moments.
Yeah. Yeah. God, I don't know. Some of those guys were, I couldn't do it either. You know,
Well, you've probably played with some Buddy-like conductors, I would imagine.
You think? Yeah. Yeah, there were a couple at least, yeah. But thankfully we also had a lot of really good conductors that you know, really respectful of the musicians, and you know, it makes for great music. It really does. Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, well, I'm so delighted that Mark somehow he not sure how it was that we were connected. He sent a text or something last night, and then he said that he was going to be talking to you, and I was like, oh no, he asked me if I knew you. That's what it was. I said, well, yeah, of course, from back in the day, but for some reason, I think maybe that when you auditioned, I thought maybe that you had really enrolled, because I think it was like the next year that I wasn't there, that I was up at Miami, you know. So yeah. And so I was like, sure. And then I said, okay, well, I'll see if I can just chime in for a few minutes to say hi.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. It's good.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to miss that, because it's been way too long. And yeah.
Are you living in Houston now?
No. After I retired from Rice, I came back to Cincinnati.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. So I'm here in Cincinnati, and like I said, in the winter, I spent some time with all my family still in Florida, you know.
Okay.
Land of Cuban cigars, and
I love Cuban cigars.
Do you know that's what my parents did for a living?
No kidding. Wow.
They used to roll the handmade Cuban cigars.
Wow.
I mean, like before the whole political thing where they had the embargo. Yeah, the discussions at our dinner table every night had to do with the quality of the leaf and the wrapper and the filler and the this and the moisture and the that, you know. And of course, after the Cuban embargo, they were like pulling their hair out because they were getting kind of not the best quality leaves,
right,
you know,
right.
to make the Cuban cigars. That's when they had to go to the Dominican Republic. But
right, they sent the seeds to the Dominican Republic.
Right, that's exactly right. Yeah, so I grew up in El Barrio Latino. Yeah, all those. Yeah.
Do you smoke cigars?
No. I used to smoke cigarettes.
Okay.
Nasty habit. But it was back in the day, you know, that's what everybody did. But fortunately, it's been almost 40 years ago now that I quit.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. It's a dumb thing to do.
Well, you know, one thing I wanted to mention just in the overall thing is that I've been appointed the new artistic director of the Toledo Jazz Orchestra. And
congratulations.
Oh, thanks. It's, you know, it happened a year ago, but we haven't really done anything except a holiday video and live stream like this. And I'm planning concerts for this summer and then into next year. But I'm going to be coming to Ohio 4 or 5 times a year at least. And I have a lot of, you know, people I like to play with in Cincinnati. Steve Schmidt, piano player.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Steve. Yeah.
You know, so I'll let you know, and hopefully we can meet and hang.
That would be lovely.
You're always one of my heroes. You know.
I didn't realize that
from the beginning.
Thank you.
From the beginning, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I'm going to excuse myself because I'm sure Mark has a ton of things he wants to ask you. He's a great interviewer.
I noticed.
What did you say, Mark?
Is it just 6 questions?
Just 6 questions. Yes. Okay. Well, Tim, be well, my dear.
All right.
Stay safe.
All right. Thank you. You too. Thank you. I'll see you soon. Okay.
All right. Bye. Oh, Mark, by the way, thanks, Mark. Bye.
Bye. Talk to you soon. Bye, Marie.
Talk to you soon, babe. Take care. Love you. Bye.
You'll get it. You're still there, Marie.
I know. I'm trying. You remember what I don't understand about technology will fill this room, okay? And then some. Okay. How do I get out of here?
You're close. Just hit end. There you go.
Wow, that was great.
Surprise.
Yeah.
So we were talking about was there probably, I'm sure there's always more. I mean, you were asking, because your writing style, obviously you learned quite a bit from all these guys you're around and from Thad. I know you said you didn't ask too many questions, but would you say that he's a part of your writing?
Well, yes, yeah, of course. I didn't want to say anything like that he's not, because he's always there.
Sure.
And I've never, with improvisation, as I described earlier, and also composition, I'm pretty much self-taught, and always trying to figure out what I want to learn and then figure out how to learn it. Yeah. And I did that with Thad Jones. I looked at some of his scores, and I played in his band for several years in Europe. And at that time, he encouraged the guys in the band to write. And he always did that with the Thad Mel band anyway. On every record, there's charts by different members. It's not just Thad's writing. Right. And so the first chart that I wrote, he actually recorded on one of the records that we did. The band was called the Thad Jones Eclipse. And he recorded the first arrangement I ever wrote. And I learned from Stan that the arrangers that wrote for Stan, that if you want to have your chart played, write a solo for the leader. And so it's kind of a ballad that goes into a medium swing thing. And I wrote it for Thad. At that time, he had some chop problems, so he was playing valve trombone. And then he improvises around me playing the melody, and then vice versa. And so he recorded it. But at that time, I hadn't really, it was more writing from common sense, not like anything that I learned from Thad at that point.
Right. Right.
And then when I didn't do a lot of writing until I came back to Cincinnati and started playing with the Blue Wisp Big Band with John Von Ohlen and Steve Schmidt, a great piano player. And and I was taking the only arranging class I've ever taken. I took at CCM, just kind of auditing the class with Rick Van Meter, who was teaching it. And that kind of solidified a lot of disparate information that I had about voicings. And one of the things we did was go through this book called Inside the Score by Ray Wright. And he took some charts of Sammy Nestico, Thad Jones, and Bob Brookmeyer and broke it down so that with annotations, and it was an incredible book. I've actually played through it, and the book is just like 6-7 scores, but I played through it 3 times in my lifetime at different points. And I can't play the piano at all, so it's very slow. But again, back to the vertical and horizontal meaning of notes and chords. If you play a voicing Sammy Nestico, which is basically the 4-part trumpet voicing doubled an octave down for the trombones, and then the 5 saxes kind of spread based on the range of the saxophones, that's like a very standard Sammy Nestico way of writing. And so I'd play the first note, even if it's an 8th note, and I'd have to like get my fingers into the next thing. But with the pedal down, I would hear that chord and how it sounded. Mm-hmm. And I could get all that information about what's happening, because everything I played was a fermata. And then going to the Thad Jones voicings, where you've got all these things. Wow, he's got like this against this, and here's where he put this, and oh, that's why it sounds the way it sounds. So I went through that book the first time in 82, 83 when I was playing in Cincinnati. And then I wrote some charts where I didn't necessarily try to imitate Thad Jones, but vertically I did.
Right.
I used my own melodies coming out of the way I improvised, but I used Thad's voicings to try to get that sound. And then after that, I just started kind of writing in a different way. And I didn't write anything for many years. It wasn't until 1995 when I started with the Norrbotten Big Band. And I was the artistic director, and I was, kind of one of the missions was to set a band profile. And so I did a lot of the writing. And especially when Finale came along a few years into my tenure, it really changed the way I could write, because as I said, I don't play the piano very well. So I would, I could hear it back. I could write something and then Finale would play it back. It was like having a band waiting in the room next door and running in with the next 4 bars,
Yeah.
And because I had the ability to do that, I started taking a lot more chances. And I still use, if I'm writing something that's, somewhat kind of standardish, then I might rely on my Thad Jones information about the vertical voicings.
Right.
But a lot of times I'm trying to find other ways to voice things and always experimenting. And Finale helps with that experimentation.
I'll flip back to the Woody Shaw, Freddie Hubbard stuff in a minute, but
yeah.
While we're talking about your writing, I know yesterday we spoke on the phone and you told me about the Gunter von
right.
And that blew me away when you told me that answer. Can you talk to people about that concert and where your mind went after that?
Well, as I said, in 95, I started with the Norrbotten Big Band, and I was in charge of setting a profile. And instead of playing, music that if we had a guest soloist that they brought around every band, we wanted to do something that was individual. So maybe we had the same guest soloist that other bands had, but this is going to be a new program. And for the audiences, this is going to be something special because they're hearing something nobody else has ever heard, Yeah. And so I decided that somehow I had to get inspiration for writing more than just the other people that were writing for big bands at that time. And so I really didn't write anything from like 84 to 95. And instead I played, because I was breaking into New York and then somewhat broken in, playing with a lot of big bands from the old Thad band with Mel Lewis on Mondays, or Gil Evans, Maria Schneider. I played with her band for 4 years. Right. John Fedchock, Bob Belden, who had a completely different take, Bob Mintzer. So I was playing a lot of written, composed jazz music, and hearing a lot of great things, mostly great things. And also along the way, you hear things where you think, well, I would not do that. Or, you know, that's not something that attracts me that I would. And those are good things too, you know. It's hard to, and I'm not saying anything negative, but it's hard to say those things about people that you're friends and that you love and work with, you know. But I did play music that I would think, man, this is not happening at all, you know. And I played those charts many times. But that's okay, because that's all part of like building your personality about what you will use and what you, I mean, I felt the same way playing with Stan, you know. I have to say though, that with Thad Jones, I never felt that at all, you know, or Ernie Wilkins, you know, or Belden, you know, that was always incredible. And just by chance, I was over in Germany with Bob Belden, and we had a night off, and somebody at this festival we were playing at had tickets to the NDR Orchestra with Gunther Wand conducting. And they were playing one piece, Bruckner's Fifth Symphony. And you know, I'd listened to classical music before, but I really wasn't familiar with Bruckner. In fact, I didn't even really know where he fit into the lineage, and, you know. Yeah. But I'd listen to some very modern music. Of course, I'd listen to Mozart and Beethoven and Brahms, and, you know, a little bit of Shostakovich. It was like I was listening to jazz, because that's what I was trying to learn. Yeah. And I heard that concert, and it changed my life. The Fifth Symphony, I don't know, is an hour long. And I was just amazed at what was going on. And of course, the NDR Symphony is an incredible band, you know. And he's a historic conductor. He probably, I forget whether he was using the score or not, but he probably conducted that piece, you know, yeah, many times. And it just was like, okay, if I'm going to do this gig with the Norrbotten Big Band, this is the composer's world. I have to get deeply into it. And the way I listened was back to being on the bus with 60 LPs for a year. I found Bruckner's First Symphony, the one called the First Symphony. Yeah. And I listened to it probably 50 times in a row, and maybe listened to some other jazz or something, but no other classical music, just the First Symphony 50 times. And I played along with it. I cranked it up on the speakers, and I actually improvised along with the entire symphony. And I'm saying this as a joke, but I played the part that Bruckner failed to write for me, you know. And I learned so much by playing along with it, about the orchestration possibilities, the form, melodies. I would notice a melody that I had learned from the first movement was now being used as the bass line in the fourth movement. And I'm thinking, well, how did that happen? But it all ties together to be a cohesive listening experience, even if you don't notice things like that. And so I went through each of Bruckner's symphonies without really listening to anybody else or any other classical music. It took like 6 or 7 months to go through all 9 symphonies. And then about halfway through, I was reading a biography and found out there's something called the Zero Symphony, or the Knoll Symphony, and also the Study Symphony that he wrote unnumbered before the First Symphony. Right. And so I had to go back. I stopped maybe between the 5th and the 6th and went back and listened to the early ones, because I also like to listen to things in chronological order that they were written, in which they were written. You know, if you start with Bruckner's 9th, that tells you something. But if you're familiar with everything, all of those symphonies up into the 9th, then it's like, okay, this is the next step, you know. And then I did that with several other composers, you know, Sibelius. I love Sibelius. And the only degree I have besides a high school degree is an honorary doctorate from the Sibelius Conservatory in Helsinki. So Sibelius, you know, they're
Very close. Did you switch off a finale at some point? Right. Sorry.
Yeah, that's the next step, an honorary doctorate from finale.
Yeah.
But, you know, Mahler, Shostakovich, Stravinsky, and I didn't listen to everything, you know, but a lot of it, and always in chronological order. And then, of course, the you know, the whacked out guys, I like to call them the whacked out French guys, Varese and I always say this wrong, Dutilleux. How do you say it? You should know.
Yeah, we don't listen to him too much.
Yeah, that guy, incredible. And of course, Olivier Messiaen,
right.
You know, just the Quartet for the End of Time, the Triangle Lila Symphony, Canyons and Stars, is that what it's called?
Yep.
Yeah, you know.
I know that is, yep.
Yeah, and several others, but pretty much that whole time, and I was back on the bus because the Norrbotten Big Band was, you know, talking about the Swedish arts thinking. It wasn't a radio band, although we recorded for Swedish radio quite a bit, one concert, you know, on a tour perhaps, but Norrbotten is the uppermost county of Sweden, and it has one of the two full-time professional big bands in Sweden. And there are 13 or 14 cities in Norrbotten. Some of them are, you know, 80,000, some of them are 5,000 people. And so we bring over, for example, Dave Liebman, and then hit the road for 10 days and play in these towns. So I spent a lot of time on the bus again, listening over and over to classical music. And what it did was it opened up, especially listening to the same piece over and over, it opened up the possibilities for everything. It got me away from the standard blues 32 bar song form. It was like, you can start with this and take these first three little ideas and build that. With that information, you can build it for an hour. You can write an hour piece with 3 melodies. And it became incredibly fun and amusing to see how much I could, not trying to be tricky or anything, but just how much I could use these ingredients so that it was perhaps hidden, but felt, audibly felt, you know, emotionally felt. Yeah. And I've looked at a few scores, but it was more to see how things were notated. I've had the occasion to write for strings once in a while, and so I wanted to see, look at Bartók string quartets to see how it's notated. And along the way, I saw the notes and saw what he was doing, but also like how to notate classical percussion, which is a total art in itself, you know. Yeah. So I looked at scores for like some practical information because I've got all this crazy stuff going on anyway. So yeah, I didn't need to try to copy anybody else's notes, but and you know, the things I've been writing lately are more and more through composed and less based on song forms. And in fact, I think on the new CD that you mentioned at the beginning of conversation, there's some chord progressions that sound like jazz chord progressions, and there's 1 or 2 spots where the music actually sounds like a song with a form and a beginning and an end, but the rest of it is pretty much through composed and just using motifs and rhythms and ideas, musical ideas, and then morphing them and using them in different ways, sometimes hopefully undetectable, you know.
Well, it did feel like when you were, when I was listening to it, like maybe the second or third time through, I was noticing how kind of economical you were with some of the ideas you had. I mean, in the most positive way, like you went right to them. I didn't feel like there was any unnecessary material around it, you know.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah, and you know, and you were also talking to me about some of those other composers like Copland and stuff that influenced some of that writing too, because there's chordal quintal harmony going on.
Right.
And,
right. Well, you know, I failed to mention Aaron Copland a minute ago, but he's the one that I probably listen to the most, because it's amazing what he wrote in the 20s compared to the Third Symphony and you know, the dance works for Martha Graham, Appalachian Spring, and that what's been called the Americana sound, you know. And now you hear it every tearjerker moment in a film. You hear something, the lonely trumpet or the clarinet that you know. If I didn't know every note Copland wrote, I would say, oh, they've taken that from Copland, but it doesn't. It's not from anything he wrote, but it's coming directly out of that vibe, you know. Right. And but what he wrote in the 20s, I mean, he wrote his second symphony is actually an organ concerto for Nadia Boulanger. She came over to the Boston Symphony, and they premiered it. And I forget who the conductor was. It wasn't Kusevetsky, but
oh, it would have been before.
Yeah, but he made the comment that he said, "Young man, if you keep writing like music like this, someday you're going to kill somebody," or something to that effect, because it was totally dissonant and just, you know, incredibly ahead of its time.
Yeah.
And listening to that and the stuff he wrote in the early 30s, some things based on, you know, Jewish Belarus folk music, sextet pieces that he wrote, and then how that transformed into Appalachian Spring and Billy the Kid and the Red Pony and the Third Symphony. And then, you know, the last piece he wrote, I think, is Connotations.
Connotations for orchestra, right?
Yeah, which was, you know, commissioned at the opening of Lincoln Center, where he's writing supposedly 12-tone music, you know. And you look at this whole thing from the early 20s to basically 1965, 66, that body of work and what he went through is just incredible, you know.
Yeah.
You know, and I read a biography, I forget who it's by, it's a great biography. I used it as a listening guide too, to when I was listening to his music. And he told an interviewer that he needs some new chords. He's looking for new chords. And a few paragraphs before, they had talked about the fact that he didn't really listen to jazz at all. And I thought, well, if you want some new chords, you know, there's a band playing down the street at the Vanguard on Monday nights, and you know, here's some new chords there.
That's surprising to hear that he didn't listen to much jazz. I mean, when you think about some of the burlesque writing that he did, sometimes it's
right.
You know, yeah, it's
yeah.
But that's amazing. You'd be an amazing music history teacher, I think. Everybody would. Yeah. They learn complete people.
Well, you know, and another book I read before I wrote A Conversation, I needed some time, because it's basically a piece where it's an hour-long piece with 5 movements, and I've divided up the big band into mixed instrument groups, and they converse. And in order to really get into that, I needed some time to go back to listening to a lot of classical music, because I hadn't written anything in a few years, to get some inspiration and just to remind me of like the possibilities of, you know, what you can do. And I also read a book by Alex Ross called The Rest is Noise, which I highly recommend. And it's basically a history of 20th century music, starting off with in I think 1901 or 1902, Richard Strauss premiere of, I forget now. And Mahler was there, Schoenberg was in the audience, and I won't name the future dictator and world terror, who was also a young person at that point in Austria that was also there, supposedly in the audience. But, you know, it was an event. This is before recorded music. I mean, Strauss has a new piece, and people were like music tourists. They came from all over to attend the premieres, you know. So the book starts with that concert and goes all the way up through, you know, whacked out modern electronic music, you know.
Yeah.
Terry Riley and Boulez, and, you know, it's a great book. And I learned so much reading about all of these that filled in a lot of gaps. So I highly recommend that too.
But that was what you read before you wrote the music for this most recent recording.
That's true. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing, the way you wrote this piece and how the instruments are laid out. You were talking about that a little bit, because we were also talking about big band music. Students now don't hear big bands as much. They're not around. A lot of programs in the States don't have big bands or stage bands anymore. And the way you wrote that was so unconventional, where we're not thinking about a row of saxophones, trombones, and trumpets and rhythm section.
Right.
How did you conceive of configuring the ensemble in that way?
Well, I wrote a piece for the Norbotten Band about 20 years ago called Concerto for Divided Orchestra. And I did the same thing. I divided the big band into a group of soloists, and then another group that had another emotion, and another group that had another emotion. And we set up in those configurations. And it was about 15 minutes long. And it was more coming out of just the jazz thing with heads and solos and some backgrounds. But I wanted to expand on that idea. And so this piece, A Conversation, is much more involved, where the three groups, not counting the rhythm section, but the three mixed instrument groups have a definite vibe. And you can think about this as three groups of people with 4 or 5 people that all basically feel the same way. And the conversation is about an abstract subject. It could be anything. Not, I wrote it in the fall of 2016, but I wasn't thinking about politics or the election or anything. But you can think of it as a group of 3 groups of 5 people that have a different opinion about a subject, or a group of thousands of people, 3 different groups that all feel differently, or 3 individuals. Well, this person feels this way, this person feels this way. So there's what I called in my notes when I was kind of outlining the vibe of the piece before I started writing, the brash group, which is 2 trumpets and 2 trombones, who were going to come in and interrupt and be, that thing. And then there's the passive group, which was, I think, a lot of woodwinds. I forget the exact groupings now. And then kind of like the very steady, confident group, but not pushy and brash. So everything that the band discusses with these 3 groups, I kept the emotion of those that I designated to those three groups. And, even if it's like one person in each emotion group, you're conflicted within yourself. Here's a person who's brash, and very opinionated, but they can change. And if you give them the right information, perhaps they can see something a little differently than they've already decided. And somebody who might be a little shy, but has great ideas, but is insecure and needs to be prodded to bring that idea out, because it may help change the brash person. Or, there's all this interplay if it's 3 people or 3 groups of a lot of people. And the rhythm section functions as the kind of the mediator, or somebody to bring everybody down to earth when, things get too raucous.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of other like little things in there. There's a melody that comes in, an ascending melody that's actually built on some kind of a piled upon major 7 chord where every note in the chromatic scale is used. And I use that ascending, melody, and then change some notes in it. Like, here's an opinion with this melody, but here's the other group kind of thinks the same, but not really. So I change some notes.
Yeah.
And these things keep coming, back and forth, the discussions. And also there's aleatoric playing as well, where I wrote rhythms and notes and and those rhythms and notes were based on actual things that I composed that are played like in time and together.
Right.
I've stated the ideas. Now we're going to break down into groups and discuss. And so they can use the notes and rhythms in any way they want, but they have to adhere to those notes and approximate the rhythms. If there's a long note, it has to be longer than the short note, but it could be a real long note and a kind of short note, or it could be a short long note, but then the next note has to be shorter. You know, it's like these relationships, much like people converse. So, you know, that was kind of the idea behind it.
I mean, it's compelling, the whole thing. It goes by very quickly, actually.
Oh, cool.
I think I was like, this is great. More people should hear this.
Well, if I can
CD also, just because since I'm almost 50, I can.
Yeah. Right. And if I can put a little plug in, I have like the 3 records that we've put out, my wife and I, who I want to talk about in a minute, because we're involved together in the dance and music.
I was going to ask you about that.
But this is a conversation, and I also wrote this. It's a tribute to John Cassavetes, Faces Under the Influence, with the NDR band. And John Cassavetes was a very original film director. He was an actor. We might know him from Dirty Dozen and Rosemary's Baby, but he made his own films that were an incredible inspiration to the French New Wave, about human emotion and the frailties, futility of life, and the victory of, you know, the human experience. And so I took a character from each of his movies and wrote a musical portrait, and actually asked the musicians to become that character, especially the soloists when they were playing the music. So that's Faces Under the Influence. And then Moon is Waiting is a whacked out quartet record. This is my little plug, I'm sorry, but all 3 are available on Bandcamp, Tim Hagans Bandcamp, and without blowing my own horn, which I do quite a bit, literally, it's heartfelt individual music, and I've always tried to, everything I do is an honest expression of every moment of my life up to the point that I start putting air through the horn or writing music. So there's nothing contrived, or, you know, it's just the gift of humanity, and hopefully it'll be supported.
Well, I'll put on the I'll make sure we put a note, some websites on the filler for the YouTube.
Okay, great, yeah.
And you know, I'm going to ask you to play a little bit in a minute, but before we do that, let's go ahead and talk about the things with your wife, the dance stuff, which looks very cool.
Yeah, well, Michelle Brangwyn is she's an incredible dancer, choreographer, classically trained, but she has a dance company, the Michelle Brangwyn Dance Ensemble, and it's modern dance. And the musicians, she always commissions original music, and the musicians, it's always live music, and the musicians are always in the visual imagery. And, you know, I see a lot of dance productions, and it's pre-recorded music. And if there is live music, usually the musicians are off to the side, but we're always involved in the choreography. We're not doing pirouettes, but we're involved in the storytelling and the emotion, interacting with the dancers, both with choreographed moves for the musicians, and also there's improvised sections as well. So it's really something completely different in the world of dance. And I've been lucky to, you know, write a lot of the music, but also the bass player, a Houston bass player named Thomas Helton, writes a lot of the music as well. And there's a great singer, Danielle Reich, who has been writing some music recently. It's a different kind of playing, you know, because I'm not, you know, and sometimes there's a drummer, and it you know, approaches like just kind of playing like I would play in a small group, but a lot of times it's reacting to the dance in the improvisation. And instead of hearing a piano voicing and what the drummer's doing to inspire me, I'm like watching the dancer and getting the emotion and the inspiration from the movement. And that dictates, not dictates is perhaps too strong a word, but informs me what I should play next to go along with that. So it's another way of thinking up crazy lines and wild eighth notes, but the inspiration's coming from something completely different. And
where can people find this? Is this on YouTube or their video?
Yeah, YouTube channel, Brangwyn Dance on YouTube, and Brangwen, Michelle Brangwyn, and her website too has a lot of information and videos.
How long have you guys been doing this?
Started in well, I started when we met in 2007, but she's had the dance company for over 20 years, and it's incredibly interesting. And now in this last year, we've been, you know, she takes dance class virtually instead of going into the city, and we have rehearsals via Zoom with the dancers in their homes, and we've made 2 dance films. We're working on the 3rd one because we have access to an incredible rooftop in Long Island City that overlooks Manhattan, and it's safe, and so we've made 2 dance films on the rooftop, and those are also available on the website.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you some trumpet questions.
Sure.
Before we get close to midnight, but but I did want to ask you, you brought up a singer when you were talking about the dance thing, and I'm always curious, especially with jazz musicians, who are your favorite singers that you like?
Well, there's a lot of them, and if you know, you said jazz singers, and
oh, it didn't have to be jazz singers. I guess that's
well, you know, I only brought that up because many people don't realize what a great jazz singer Johnny Mathis is. And, you know, his first record in, I think it was 55, 56, Thad did some arrangements, Gil Evans. I mean, he was an incredible jazz singer. In fact, he used to go into this club, I forget the name of it, in San Francisco. Errol Garner was playing there, and he would sit in with Errol Garner and sing standards. And he heard Errol play Misty, and it had no lyrics. So Johnny commissioned, I forget who wrote the lyrics, to write lyrics to this great tune that Errol Garner was playing. And that became a huge hit for Johnny, you know. And a friend of mine, Scott Lavender, we went to Bowling Green together, is Johnny's musical director for many years. Maybe you've worked with Scott. He conducts.
The name does sound familiar, so maybe.
Yeah. And, you know, whenever Johnny's playing around the New York area, Scott gets me on the gig as the 3rd trumpet player. And it's like, and I don't do shows at all. I'm not part of that thing. I'm not on anybody's list, but I love Johnny Mathis. Like I said, I saw Marie with Johnny Mathis when I was a kid. So, and he sounds great. I mean, he's in his mid 80s. He looks like he's 40. He sounds incredible. And I have that first record. So I always think of him as a jazz singer who also, you know, sings some pop tunes. And
you know, this there's an old Tonight Show clip of Johnny Mathis singing this Michel Legrand tune, and it was apparently Carson's favorite performance.
Wow. Well,
I'll send it to you because it's crazy what he's doing. Yeah. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. No, he's you know, and he's a great guy too. He's very friendly and accessible and humble, and you know, just so long answer to your question, but you know, Johnny Hartman, the record with Coltrane, and of course Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, you know, because Ella could really scat. I mean, she was like, you know, scat like a horn player. Yeah. And what a great feel, you know. And then and Billie Holiday, just it was like you know, every note straight from the heart. Yeah. You know. And I'm sure there are many others. I've been thinking about trumpet players all day, but you know.
Well, you know, so speaking of those trumpet players, just to get back to those kind of seminal people in your life, I mean, Woody, Freddie, and Miles, and of course we talked about Thad.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about like what you took from each of those other 3 people and you played with, I mean, you had relationships with Woody and Freddie also.
Yeah, I never met Miles, but but we could start with Miles. You know, to me, Miles is a painter, and it's funny. You know, I talk about hearing Bruckner's Fifth and then going back and starting. But with Miles, I think maybe I borrowed records from the library. The first Miles record I got from the library was Bitches Brew. That was Miles to me, my first, you know. And then I went back and, you know, listened to everything else. And I'm still listening to things. There's a record, The Cellar Door, Live at the Cellar Door, that came out about 10 or 15 years ago, a box set of just from a little club from 1971, 72. A couple of nights, and Miles he's painting. It's Keith Jarrett, Jack DeJohnette, Michael Henderson on bass, Gary Bartz, John McLaughlin was there on a couple of nights, but he's like just painting over these grooves, leaving a lot of space, and there's motif development. And I think I was listening a lot to the Electric Miles things that were out when I was with Kenton, and it was the same kind of thing as I mentioned before. I could play a few notes and Gary Hobbs would like fill in the stuff. Yeah. And that's what I heard DeJohnette do, you know, on the live Miles things. And so that was really a big influence from the beginning. Yeah. And, you know, people have these jumping off points, you know, people would say, I stopped listening to Miles at Kinda Blue in 59 and Bitches Brew in 69. I can't stand anything, you know, I loved everything he did. You know, even the last things that might be a little slicker and more, you know, pop oriented, just, you know, every note he played was just incredible, you know.
I'm playing in person a few times, I'm sure.
I'm sorry?
You saw him play in person, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, and you know, it was the later part in the 80s, you know, or early 80s, and he smiled at the audience, and you know, he kind of like would do things he was famous for and then turn around and smile at the audience. He'd turn his back and play. Right. And then he'd like, it was like he was making fun of himself in a way, like, I'm not serious, but you expect me. I was serious doing this in the 60s maybe, but now I'm not serious, but you expect me to do it, so here I'm doing it. See, you know, I mean, there was like this sense of humor about him, you know.
Yeah.
You know, and
oh, go ahead.
You know, well, you know, Freddie Hubbard, I heard him at this club in Dayton, Jilly's, 1974, and it changed my life because I'd never heard like the trumpet played like this. And out of all the, you know, the jazz trumpet players, those 30, 32 years when he was just on fire, it was just unbelievable, you know. Yeah. And the sound and every note had a vibe, and the hip lines, I mean, just, you know, it was just, yeah, goosebumps, you know.
Talk to me about that record that you and Marcus made together that is the Freddie record.
Well, that was produced by Bob Belden, who not only was a great saxophone player, composer, but was kind of an A&R guy, producer for Blue Note Records. And he had an idea to help Freddie out financially to do a record with me and Marcus, two trumpet players on Blue Note, and do Freddie Hubbard songs. Because Freddie had done records. He did a record with Lee Morgan for Blue Note, the two of them, The Night of the Cookers. And then he also did some records in the 80s with Woody Shaw, the two of them together. So there was like a tradition at Blue Note with two trumpet players. Yeah. So we recorded only songs that Freddie still had the compositional rights to. And everybody on the record, except for me and Marcus, were former Freddie side persons, as we say today, you know. So, and Freddie was there. He was supposed to play, but he decided not to because the 90s, he had these, you know, chop problems. And this was in 97, I think. But he was there, 2 days of rehearsals, 2 days of recording, and I'd hung out with him before, and so had Marcus. So it was, you know, it was great to be around him. And you know, it was interesting, and this is something I talk about to students, that we were sitting in the control booth listening to a take, and after the take and whatever we decided to do another one or keep that one, Marcus had this book, and I have it over here on my music stand. It's like 28 Freddie Hubbard solos.
Right.
And I wish I had brought mine, but Marcus brought his and asked Freddie to sign it. And Freddie, signed it, and he looked at it, and he looked up at both of us, and he shook the book a little bit, and he goes, "This book tells you exactly what I played. It's accurate. It's right on. This is what I played. It tells you what I played." And then he looked at us with that grin, and he says, "But it doesn't tell you why I played it." And I thought, well, there you go, because only Freddie would know why he played those notes. And you can't put it into words. It's nothing you can,
wow,
you can teach, but it's like, yeah, it doesn't tell you why I played that note on that chord, but it tells you that I did. And that's what I think is really missing a lot in jazz education is, why are you playing this? Well, a lot of students are playing this because they've been told it's correct. They're playing it because it's part of the history, because they have to pass a jury, but left up to your own devices, why are you playing those notes? And so that was a great lesson, and he ran into chop problems, and he was practicing and trying to get it back. And I know he felt really kind of, bad about the fact, but the problem also was that he was so far ahead of everybody else just in playing the trumpet as a trumpet player, that no matter on what level he came back to, that would always be compared to this other Freddie Hubbard from 1978 or 85 or 64, and that's a tough thing to compete with,
And
on that level.
Maybe we can get back to your education point in a second. Talk about Woody Shaw, because you were around him a lot over in Europe as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't living there, but he lived in Paris in the early 60s, but he was like the cat, Columbia Records, and he was playing all over and touring a lot. So I saw him 4 or 5 times a year in different places in Europe, And I'd been, right when I moved to Malmo, I played a couple of gigs with Dexter, and I was just kind of put on the gig, and it was cool with Dexter. And after the first set, he put his arm around me and he just kind of shook me, and he said, "You sound a lot like Woods," which was Woody's nickname, And I thought, well, I guess I'm not fired. I'd just gotten fired from Woody's band, So I was like, see if we can break the streak. And about a year later, Woody was playing at the club in Copenhagen, and Dexter was there. He was touring a lot because he had just made this huge comeback, so he was in and out of Copenhagen. But he took me backstage and introduced me to Woody, and Woody had heard me, I think, on some Stan Kenton records or something, so he was aware of me and asked me to sit in. And and so it was me and Dexter and Woody's band playing the third set at this club. And then I saw him many times, always said hello. He was always friendly. He called me his alter ego one time because,
wow.
Because I was really, you don't hear it so much now, but 1979, 80, around there, he was the guy I was listening to all the time. And so I think it, he heard he heard the compliment I was paying him. Hopefully he took it that way,
Yep.
And so, and in New York, when I finally got to New York in 87, 88, I think he died in 88, 89 at the latest, I forget. But I sat in with him a few times in New York, and he was always really friendly, really, just, and the great thing about Woody was, who Rich Little is? I'm not sure, people, you're old enough to know Rich Little,
Sure.
Impressions on Johnny Carson.
Right.
Woody Shaw was the Rich Little of the trumpet. And one time backstage, he said, "Okay, who's this?" And he played something. It sounded exactly like Pop's, but it wasn't like a Pop's lick. It was something, in that style. with that sound, articulation, vibrato, everything. And then he did Who's This? And it was Roy Eldridge. And then Who's This? It was Clifford Brown. Who's This? Fats Domino. He could imitate all of those guys, you know. And I mean, that's really something, to be able to change the sound, using the same horn, the same mouthpiece, doing all these different sounds and ways of articulating and playing. It's incredible, you know.
He could have been a successful trumpet player in any genre. I mean,
yeah,
really could have.
Yeah.
Before I ask you about playing something, you know, you just alluded to it, and I thought it was an interesting point about sort of the way that jazz is taught.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and what and maybe talk a little about your feelings on that, because there is definitely an academic side to things now, because I guess form follows function, I guess.
Right.
And then there's like, but you're not a big transcriber. I mean,
right.
So talk about those two things.
Well, and then maybe I can play a few things to kind of demonstrate some things. But, you know, I might be part of the last generation where formal jazz education wasn't available yet. And of course, there was Berkeley, North Texas. You know, there was, I forget, one of the schools in Illinois, maybe Miami in Florida. I'm not sure. You know, I'm sure a lot of colleges had something going on. But, and I remember when I was playing along with Miles at the Black Hawk and Mongo Santa Maria records and rock records, the James Gang. I was a big rock and roll, you know, head and growing up. And Blood, Sweat, and Tears in Chicago. And then Jamie Aebersold's records came out. And it's like play along with, you know, no other horn players or singers or, you know. And so that's kind of like the generation that I come from. And there wasn't a lot of material or books, you know.
Yeah.
And so I just had to teach myself. Like I said, I've always tried to figure out what I want to learn and figure out how to learn it. And it always helps when somebody comes up and says, play that note, play the third on the 5-2, and, you know, things like that. But I always asked a lot of questions and about what people were doing and listened to how they practiced, and, you know, and I'd just rather play in the practice room than transcribe. And I also didn't want to sound like anybody else. To me, the thing I heard with jazz growing up, even at an early age, 8, 9, 10, everybody sounded different. You know, my parents would have a Stan Getz record, and then they'd have a Sonny Rollins record, 2 tenor players, and they sounded completely different. And that's what I noticed. With everybody sounded different. There was nobody that sounded the same, you know. In fact, once I got a little older and hanging out with jazz musicians, that was frowned upon. You know, the guys that transcribed, if they came up on the bandstand and played stuff from those transcriptions, somebody would say something, you know, like, what are you doing? You know? So, right. No, I'm gonna, it's, I have to play in a Harmon mute. We live in an apartment, so it's late.
Oh, right.
I'm gonna, you know, but yeah, no, I already thought of that. Thanks. So the vibe for me was always to find my own voice and figure out how to do that. But, and I'm talking about a melodic voice.
Right.
And so to do that, but also have it fit over Stella by Starlight, All the Things You Are, the blues, rhythm changes, to be able to nail the changes, functional harmony, to improvise as much as possible, not rely on finger patterns or licks that I've learned, or just to keep it as improvised as possible, but sound like me. That was when I started playing, that was the vibe, that was the requirement. Mm-hmm. And I think because, you know, we're dealing with a university system, and what are they called? I can only think of the Swedish word. Sometimes that happens, but I'll think of it in a minute. The people in charge of the curriculum.
Yes.
You know, they want jazz education to look like history, English, pre-med. You know, they wanted to see, what are you going to do? for me, the first year of any jazz education program is going into a room and turning off the lights and playing. That's it for the whole year. That's the first year. And then what you discover by doing that for a year, then we'll start with all this other stuff.
Yeah.
But you can't put that in a curriculum, you know, turn the lights off and play free for a year. It's not going to work, you know. So, but I think, and I'm making a joke when I say that, of course, but I think it's the emphasis on has changed from finding your own voice and making your own history on whatever level that is. We're not talking about becoming a jazz icon, but just your own personal history has been kind of you know, replaced by playing the history.
Right.
And I think that's easy to teach. I hate to say this, but I'm not saying the teachers are lazy, but it is easier to teach. This is what Coltrane did. This is what Kenny Dorham did. This is how Thad wrote. This is, look at this Ellington score. You know, this is all great information, but it's only information as a basis for your own personal development. And that's the thing that's hard to teach, is how do you, you know, coming into my studio, how do I enable you to find your own voice so that you sound like nobody else has ever sounded playing on Stella by Starlight, and on a high, incredibly high artistic level, you know? That's like almost impossible to teach. So I'm not saying the teachers are lazy at all. I mean, they're doing, the teachers that I've known, that I've come in contact with all over the world, are doing incredible jobs. But this is something very abstract that you know, is a very personal thing to learn, unlike most other subjects taught in a university.
So how do you work on your own vocabulary then? How do you integrate?
Well, let me get my Harmon mute.
Okay.
Well, this is the first thing I talk about. And, you know, when the Michael Davis hip bone video, bone to pick videos, you know, I talk about this. But everybody has a melodic concept in them.
Right.
The way that they play melody. They like to hear melody. They like to play melody. But I think that voice is sometimes hindered because while one is developing that voice, they're trying to do it in a situation where there's right and wrong. You know, you're trying to play over the changes of this tune, but you're trying to be original. So what I recommend is separating out the, just take away the right and wrong world and start on a note, any note, and don't play anything until you really get an impulse about what the next best note should be.
Okay.
There's no time, there's no harmony, there's no key. You're not trying to adhere to anything. It's just, I'm on this note. And at this point in my life, what's the note that best describes my life's next adventure, which is playing the next note? try to put that into a curriculum.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do it this way. Tell me if it's too distorted or. You know, and I can play like that all day. I have no idea what I just played. I couldn't repeat it. It's totally improvised. And and because I've done this since I was 9 years old, basically, I make that decision about what the next best note is very quickly. 16th notes at the quarter note of 240, you know.
Yeah.
But that's what I've been concentrating on all this time. And what you hear, first of all, I'm trying to sound like you. I'm trying to sound like a classical trumpet player because I love that sound, you know. You can't hear it with the harmony mute, but that's part of my voice, you know, is that pure kind of, and I also play a lot of intervals, which came from listening to Copeland records, modern, you know, as a kid. I mean, I've always been fascinated by wider intervals, fourths, fifths.
Yeah.
And that didn't come from Woody Shaw. Woody Shaw just supported that was a valid way of thinking. I was already thinking intervals, but he was, oh, okay, here's how you do it, you know. Yeah. I'll play another one.
Is this your practice most of the day?
I'm sorry?
Is this mostly your practice?
Yeah, a lot of it is, you know, and it's funny because and I'll get to the rest of the answer in a second, but the way this works, and I do a Hagans disclaimer at the beginning of every masterclass because a couple of people have taken exception over the years when I start talking about free playing, that they think I'm like not connecting it to the traditional information that we all need to learn, and that I'm just saying, oh, just play free and you'll be cool. So this is just something to go along with everything else that's being taught.
Yeah.
You know, because the free playing, now I'm not thinking about any tonal center or any scale. I'm just playing free melody. And it's really honest. It's what I think the next note should be every time. And it's impossible to play anything wrong because there's nothing, I might have cracked a couple of notes, but I didn't play any wrong notes because there's no harmonic background to say, it was a wrong note, you know. Yeah. And then you slowly put in the restrictions. Like if you're learning a certain scale, like the Dorian scale, a D minor scale with a B natural, you know, yeah. Then play for 10 minutes, totally free, but only using notes from the D minor scale. See how creative you can be with just those notes. You have to limit yourself to the D Dorian scale, but 10 minutes of total improvisation, only using those notes. And you know, and then you add time, okay? 10 minutes at a tempo, only the Dorian scale. And so slowly adding all these things, it gets closer and closer to playing over like rhythm changes at a breakneck pace, nailing all the changes. And so, and I'm working on I'm going to start writing a book on improvisation. I finally feel ready that I can like present all this stuff in the proper order and in the proper way. And, but what I'm doing now, just what I've been playing around with the last 6 months, is I finally figured out what is meant by Messiaen's scales of limited transposition. And he had this system of harmony. He wrote a book called The Organization of Harmony or something that I'd like to get, you know. But he found scales that have limited transposition. For example, a whole tone scale, C, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, B flat, and C. If you started on C sharp, then you get totally different notes. But if you started on D, you get the same scale as if you started on C.
Right.
So that's a limited transposition scale. The diminished scale is also, there's 3 different, you know, if you start a diminished scale on C and C sharp and D, different scales. But if you started on E flat, it's the same scale started on C. And when I figured that out, it was hilarious. I'd always heard about these scales, but I didn't really know what it meant. The third one is what I've been using in this manner that I just described, the Dorian scale. Right. And the third one is this basically, it's the first three notes of a minor scale. For example, starting on C, C, D, E flat, right, and then E, F sharp, G, and then A flat, B flat, B. So it's, and those roots are like a whole tone chord, C minor, E minor, and A flat minor, but only the first three notes. So you get this scale. You know, and because I've listened so much to Messiaen, I hear like it sounds familiar because he uses these scales. Now, if you start that scale on C sharp, it's different notes. If you start it on D, different. If you start it on E flat, different. But if you start it on E, you get the same scale as C or A flat, you know. So what I've been doing is taking that scale and limiting myself to those notes, but playing freely within that system.
Wow.
And you know, I find out all sorts of things. I find out where the fourths are, where the fifths are. There's 3 spots in the scale where there are 3 half steps. You know, and there's all sorts of, you know, and I'm, you know, finding out where I can use it over jazz harmony, but it's actually not, I don't even really care about that. What I'm doing is working with a scale and a sound that I've never really worked with before and trying to be creative within those parameters. And so that's what I'm practicing these days. Messiaen's scales of limited transposition.
Incredible.
You know, and it's funny if you write one of them in one of the scales and then you start another one a minor third below, the harmony you get, all of a sudden it's starting to sound familiar, like some of the organ pieces that he's you know, written. It's like a little window into the way he thought, you know.
Man, no wonder your composing is so good.
Oh, well, thank you. You know,
this has been amazing. I mean, you know, I know you and I could probably talk for days. So
yeah, well, this is just part 1 of 4.
I hope so. I hope so. This is amazing. I'm so glad you did this tonight, and so glad you played. And I appreciate it, and I hope people will check these recordings out because they're just super good, and I'll put links to them on.
Okay, great, thank you.
And I also appreciate that you, well, number one, for sending them, but I appreciate that you. We talked about this briefly, but that you put them on CD. I mean,
Yeah.
the thing about listening on a physical object versus MP3 is just. It's not even close.
Well, yeah, the fidelity and the, you know, it's, and I'd like to put these out on LP, but they're just too long. They don't really fit into an LP configuration with 18 or 20 minutes on a side. But yeah, I mean, you know who, because you have the CDs, you know where it was recorded, when it was recorded, who the musicians are, who's playing the solos, you know.
I see Jonathan Wiseman's on this CD. I went to school with his younger brother.
Oh, really?
And I knew his dad.
Oh, yeah.
Larry.
Larry. We played together a lot in Cincinnati and Indianapolis.
Yeah.
I still have a leather valve case protector that Larry gave me that his wife made.
Yeah. His wife. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great guys, great people. So
yeah.
Well, hang on for a second while I sign us off, but thanks to everybody.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mark. It's great to be part of your Mouthpiece.
Anybody's ever said that yet. Just 1 second. Thank you.
All right.